I mean, for me, all work has dignity. And no matter what job I've ever had, I wanted to be the best because I was always competitive. I wanted to win. I wanted to be the best. No matter what. I wanted to fold the socks better. I wanted to sell more socks. I wanted to be the best. Whatever it was, I wanted constant approval for being the best. And that's because my mother set it up that way.
That was the setup. That was the setup.
That was the setup.
That was the setup.
You know?
Now.
And I loved every job I've ever had, by the way.
So how long do you stay at Juilliard?
I was there for a year.
1 year.
Yeah.
And then what happens?
And then at some point I was going to go back to graduate school, and I moved to Boston, and I go in and I needed a job. I went into the career planning office at Harvard University, and they said, do you have an appointment with the National Enquirer? And in true National Enquirer fashion, I said, why, yes. Even though I didn't, right? I was like, yeah, sure, you know. And they brought me in a room and they interviewed me. And I didn't really know the National Enquirer. I used to see it on the checkout counters, but it was a national tabloid, a huge circulation, 20 million paid copies a week, which before the internet was amazing.
Yeah.
And they said, do you want to go to Florida for lunch tomorrow? I was like, yeah, I'll go to Florida for lunch tomorrow. You know, who goes to Florida for lunch in the 70s, right?
Sounds good.
And that's what I did. And then they offered me a tryout. And once they offered me a tryout, I had to do it, and I had to win.
Yeah.
And I did that, and I was very good at it.
So you worked for the National Enquirer for how long?
I think 4 or 5 years. Then they, at one point, decided that I should try out to become an editor. And I actually didn't want to do that because I loved being on the road and doing stories and interviewing people. And they forced me to do it, but I didn't want that job. Mm-hmm. But once they forced me to do it, I had to win.
And you had to win, and you had to do it well.
So it was me and like 7 other guys and only one person was going to get the job, which I didn't want, but I had to win. And I was pregnant with my son by then. Wow. So a pregnant woman throwing up every day at 4 o'clock against all these guys who had many, many years of experience. One was an editor from Time magazine, tabloid editors that came from the UK because it was a big paying job and they actually wanted the money. And I didn't want the job, but I wanted to win.
That's right.
And of course I got the job because I won, because I was so competitive.
Because that's what you do.
Because I had to win, because my mother would kill me if I didn't. Right.
So now you leave the National Enquirer after 5 years, and then what?
I moved back to New York because I wanted to live in New York.
Right.
I had my son. Right. Worked at a magazine called Women's World.
Right, which was based in New Jersey, I believe.
It was based in New Jersey for a period of time.
Women's World, yeah.
And
it was a big magazine.
It was a big magazine. I was involved in the startup of that magazine. Oh. And then at some point, I had a contract to write 2 books for Simon & Schuster. Yeah. And I was traveling, researching, on the road a lot, and my son got hit by a car and had a terrible head injury. He was 4 years old. Oh. He had a terrible head injury.
In New York?
In Maine. He got hit by a car. And I had to stop traveling. So Simon & Schuster said to me, I said, I can't finish this book right now. I'm giving you back the advance. And they said, why don't you come and work here as an editor? You have all these instincts and contacts and whatever. So that was how I started in the book business.
Wow. Okay, so now you get this job at Simon & Schuster, and tell me about the progress of that, because quite frankly, Judith, I'm not overstating that you have become a publishing icon. So how did a young lady whose son at 4 got hit by a car turn this around into a...
Well, I worked really hard. I paid attention. I listened. You know, I worked weekends. I worked evenings. I would come home, eat dinner with my son, put him to bed, start working again. You know, I didn't have a lot of sleep during those years. And, you know, I had an instinct for discovering new talent. Wally Lamb, who wrote a book called She's Come Undone. Walter Kern, who was an amazing writer. Doug
You
Copeland.
introduced me to Wally Lamb. I remember.
Amazing,
that.
amazing.
Special.
Doug Copeland, who wrote a book called Generation X. Dick Marcinko, who wrote a book called Rogue Warrior.
And this, of course, in part is driven by your inquisitiveness.
Yeah,
You're
I was just curious about a lot of different
curious.
things. And in the beginning, I had to get everyone's approval to acquire books. So I had a lot of bestsellers very quickly. Howard Stern's book, Private Parts, of course, I moved in with him for 6 weeks and worked with him.
What makes you wake up one day and say, Howard Stern, we should do a book with Howard Stern?
You know,
It's just fascinating.
I think part of my acquisition process, you know, it's changed over the years, but back then, part of it was identifying trends, identifying people who...
And being ahead of the trend?
And being ahead of it. You had to be ahead of it, because if you weren't ahead of it...
You were behind it.
You were behind it, number one, and number two, by the time they peaked, you were overpaying for it, and then they'd be on the downturn. And then, you know, the list that I acquired, it ranged from diet books, The Zone, Dr. Barry Sears' book, The Zone, which sold millions of copies, to Gregory Maguire's fiction. He wrote a book called Wicked, which became a very celebrated musical called Wicked.
Yep.
One of the biggest grossing musicals in history. So some of the books were just labors of love, like Wally Lamb, She's Come Undone, I Know This Much Is True, which ended up selling millions of copies. And we got very lucky because Oprah, after I discovered Wally Lamb and published him, started a book club and picked him twice.
Now, there's a good point about how you couldn't predict life, because how could you have predicted
You can't.
that Oprah was going to...
You can't. So sometimes you have to be passionate about something and go with your gut and just do everything you can to make it successful. So I did my labors of love. I did my labors of commerce, right? And by the way, at the end of the day, I love them all just the same. You know, I mean, there were certainly the authors whose writing, you know, Be Still My Heart, made me weep because they were so talented. But you know, back then, there was a greater sense of camaraderie. There was a greater sense of authors working with you to create something. And I would say 20, 30 years ago, people had a greater desire to be invested in the process and wanted their books to be great, much more so than now. Working with authors today is much more challenging. They don't want to do the work. It's the same thing as the culture at large.
Yeah,
they don't want to promote it. They don't want to do the marketing.
They want a shortcut.
Everybody wants a shortcut. And that's not fun.
And first of all, it's not realistic.
Right.
Second of all, it's not fun.
I want to do the work. You want to do the work. We like to do the work. I like to go on an adventure and achieve something. I like to be pushed to my limit. I like to be able to do more than what I bargained for. I like to honor my commitments, you know? And the culture's not there anymore.
No.
You know?
So you stay at Simon & Schuster for how long?
Years.
Years.
Till 1993 or 94.
Okay.
I leave.
Leave. What do you go to do then?
Rupert Murdoch called and wanted to have lunch with me. So I went and had lunch with Rupert Murdoch.
I beg your pardon. Madame, I beg your pardon.
Yeah, Rupert called.
Because I've got to tell you something. I've been in Hollywood a long time.
He called me.
And Mr. Murdoch has never called me.
Well,
never.
I'm sorry, but he called me, and I was like, sure, I'll have lunch with you. Went and had lunch with him.
He literally called you and said, I want to have lunch with you.
And I went and had lunch with him. And,
okay.
And
how about that?
I had an agent who he wanted me to come and do something with him. The agent got in the middle of it, screwed the whole thing up. He sent me a note and said, there's no way we're going to work together given, you know, what your agent is requiring. I called the agent. I said, what did you say to him? And it was outrageous. I said, no, 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 no. So I sent him a note. I said, I'm sure the two of us could work out this whole thing over lunch.
We have another lunch.
We're having another lunch. I said, I apologize for the agent misspeaking, because I never would have asked for those things. But this is what I want. This is what I think will work for both of us. I think I could be successful. I think I could make you money. I think I could have a lot of fun doing this. I really want to do it. And And he said, sounds good. He called a lawyer, had them come to the dining room.
Right at the lunch.
Wrote it at the lunch.
At the lunch. Wait.
Wrote it on a yellow legal pad, handed it to him and said, write this up as a contract. That was my contract.
And that's how you got
That's it. And that has happened to me a number of times. And I was just very honest and very straightforward.
Here's an important feature to what you're saying. Personal diplomacy,
Yeah.
personal relationships.
So important. So important.
Here's what you didn't do with Mr. Murdoch. You didn't shoot him an email. You didn't text him.
Yeah.
You said, Mr. Murdoch, there's a misunderstanding. I'd like to meet you in person.
Yeah.
And that is central, I think.
Yeah, and also, I think it's really important for people to understand, in terms of deal making, both sides.
Right.
Make a deal that's fair for everybody and that's right for everybody. That is really what I basically believe in life.
Win-win.
Win-win. Don't think I'm going to get your last dollar, I'm going to screw you out of everything I can. You will fail as a human being. You will fail.
It's a dopey strategy.
It's a really bad strategy. Build relationships that last. Try to treat people fairly. Try to be...
Make money for your partners.
Make money for
Make
everybody
sure
around you.
Yeah.
For your employees, for your partners. Share it, care, invest yourself in the process, invest them in the process. It's very hard to find people who will do that, who understand the bigger picture.
So from that one lunch,
yeah.
magic was created. And
Oh
then,
yeah, at the end of the lunch I said, oh, and also I want my own TV show. He was like, okay. That was the beginning of the Fox News Channel.
wow.
Yeah.
So after dessert, you said, by the way.
Yeah. And by the way, I introduced him to Roger Ailes over lunch. Contrary to the stories that Roger Ailes told over the years, which were fiction, I introduced them over lunch and a deal was struck for Roger to run the Fox News Channel. That is how
And you indeed got a TV show.
I did.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is quite something.
It's an unbelievable story.
It's,
If you don't ask, you don't get. And be gracious, be generous. Big thing, be as generous as you can be with as many people as possible. As you can be. Don't be psychotic about it.
Yeah. So friends, you've just witnessed episode 2, and coming up will be episode 3.